So thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for wanting to know what Vermonters are doing about climate change. And many thanks to Richard Evers, whose idea this program was and who worked really hard to bring everybody together for it. And so thank you, Richard, and thank all of you, and especially thanks to John Woodland and Mollie Burke, our speakers for tonight. And they're going to give a brief presentation, and then we'll have a whole chat. I know some people have questions, and so we'll be taking questions as well. Yes.
Could you mention the one next week?
Yes, and we'll be having another one on the 30th. We'll have another program on the 30th that will be local efforts. So these guys are going to talk about statewide efforts, and we'll have another one that will talk about efforts happening in Brattleboro next week. And we have flyers. I'll bring them out. I'll make sure everybody gets them.
I am Representative Mollie Burke, and I represent the district in Brattleboro, now known as District 8. Brattleboro has 3 districts, used to be District 2, and I have been doing that for 16 years. It's my 16th year, and I plan to run again. There's lots to do, and I'll just give a little brief snapshot of what we're doing climate-wise in the House and in the Senate, but also to know that we're 3 weeks out from the end of the session, and anything can happen. So bills that were in the House are now in the Senate, bills that were in the Senate are now in the House, they're getting reconciled, and that's, you know, the very last days is when everything sort of gets mixed up and settled and all that. So things that I'm saying about bills might not be true in 3 weeks. I mean, you know, so it's you can always stay tuned and watch, read Vermont Digger and Vermont Public and things like that. So I have been on the Transportation Committee all my 16 years in the House, and I wanted to be on the Transportation Committee when I first ran because I was very concerned about climate change way back in 2009 and before that. And I felt like transportation is the largest contributor, well, it's now sort of equal with heating, of greenhouse gases in Vermont, like 40%. And I really wanted to try to do something about that. And at the same time, somewhere along the line, people started a climate caucus in the legislature. And now we have 90 members of our 150-member House. We do have some senators, but they have a different schedule, in the climate caucus, or official members. And I think that says a lot about the interest in the legislature for climate issues. And the Climate Caucus is worked towards pushing for legislation. You know, people are spread out in different committees. They may not be in committees that are working on climate legislation per se, but occasionally we've written letters to different committee chairs or to leadership or whatever, urging passage of certain bills. So we've been a lobbying force. And we sort of usually meet at the end of the session, at the beginning of the next session, and identify our priorities. And our priorities for the beginning of the session this year were to improve community resilience, hold fossil fuel companies accountable, modernize the renewable energy standard, reform Act 250, and invest in climate-friendly transportation solutions. And we have had over 50 bills circulating introduced this session related to climate. And climate now is really, and particularly we're operating in the wake of the devastating floods that hit Montpelier and other communities this summer, and it's lent a certain urgency to the idea of resiliency and adaptation. So bills that used to be just sort of focused on reducing emissions, we now have a broader reach. And so I'll just talk about a few of those bills. If that's, I don't want to go on too long, but just give a little snapshot of a couple of them. There's and I could say the numbers, but you're probably not going to remember them, and I never remember which. But there's a bill, a Senate Bill 213, it's known as the Flood Safety Act, that proposes to amend provisions related to wetlands, river corridor development, and dam safety. And this bill has passed the Senate, and it's going through committees in the House. And the Energy and Environment Committee has voted it out. The Committee on Ways and Means is, it's got to go there, and it'll get voted out of there. So I'm assuming, you know, it might come out with amendments, it might be different, but it's basically about just resilience related to flooding, and wetlands, and dams. And then there's another bill, S310. It's another piece of legislation that works to address community resilience in response to the disasters, and it creates a community resilience and disaster mitigation fund, and it makes changes to how statewide emergency management works in natural disasters. So it's about, you know, planning for emergency evacuation, shelters, stormwater utilities, public works employees are in on this, first responders, etc. And this has passed the Senate, and it's being currently discussed in the House Government Operations and Military Affairs Committee. There's a bill, H829 and H639. They're two housing bills that the House passed, and they're not specifically related to the environment, but the housing crisis is really interwoven with all our other work, and it's become more so with the issues of the unsheltering of people in the motel program and all of that. And the state cannot effectively act to protect Vermonters from the effects of climate change and create more resilient, sustainable, and equitable systems if it's not approaching the problem on all fronts. So H829 is a really wonderful bill that the House passed, and it has a lot of money in different buckets for different types of housing. For a program called VHIP, Vermont Housing Improvement Plan, money for middle income, you know, first-year home buyers and the missing middle and people with disabilities, a lot of different buckets in this bill. And it looked at the program, at the housing issue comprehensively, and put in tax increases to raise $90 million over a certain number of years in order to address the issue comprehensively. Unfortunately, the bill is in the Senate right now. The Senate, corresponding Senate committee is looking at sort of creating their own bill more based on regulatory reform and not really putting any money into that. So this is sort of stay tuned on that one. But it's a really good bill, and there's another bill that proposes that a seller of property must disclose to the potential buyer if the property is located in a flood hazard area. So those are just two sort of housing bills. This bill, wonderful bill called Make Big Oil Pay, as an attempt to hold fossil fuel companies accountable in the way that the Superfund issue, you know, nationally did that. And that passed, that's an S bill. It passed the Senate, and I think that it's now up for a vote. I think we voted on this. I'm sorry, I need to remember that. There have been so many bills passed through in the past couple of weeks that, so did it come through? I will check on that. And I think in any case, we're definitely going to get a lot of vetoes from the work we've done, because, and then,
Mollie, can I ask a question? Because while you're still on a bill, or you want to wait till the end to summarize?
why don't I just get through this?
Okay.
And then we'll modernize the renewable energy standard. And the House passed this bill. It requires, we do have a renewable energy standard, and it sort of amps that up with requiring utilities to source 100% of energy from renewable sources by 2030, with 10 to 20% coming from in-state sources by 2035. And this will be vital for the electrification of our society through heat pumps and electric vehicles and things like that. And then Act 250 has been a big topic of conversation, and that really impacts, again, you know, housing, it impacts land use, it impacts climate, and basically this new bill is attempting to encourage development in clusters, in communities that are already, you know, like Brattleboro, not rural communities, to sort of prevent sprawl and encourage that kind of development, which will also help with our housing, and sort of leave the forest tracts and woodlands open for drawing down carbon and for other kinds of things. And this bill, the House version of the Act 250 bill has passed the House, and the Senate is considering another bill which might have sections of that. So that's what I mean, things are sort of in flux. So we don't know exactly what is going to transpire in this, but there will be some changes to Act 250. And I think, Act 250 has been around since 1970, and it's really protected Vermont from a lot of sort of rampant development and economic result of development that fails. And I think people have been really afraid to touch it. And some people have been saying we need, it's too onerous, and the reality is that most projects do get accepted, but they have to meet certain criteria, and that's good. And then climate-friendly transportation solutions. That's been the purview of my committee. Representative Sarah Coffey, who's chair of the Transportation Committee from Guilford, and I put forth a bill, H693, in the fall, hoping to sort of get out ahead of the administration's proposal for transportation. And actually, that bill has sort of been absorbed, most of it, into H868, which is the transportation bill that passed the House unanimously on voice vote. Had a lot of really good things in it. We have some very good electrification programs, incentives for electric vehicles, and a lot of other, and for charging, in funding for the charging network so that people will want to buy an electric car. And other things related to complete streets, meaning that we make our streets accessible not only to cars but to pedestrians, bicyclists, persons with disabilities and things like that. Sort of complete streets is sort of a kind of type of policy. And also some funding for municipalities, knowing the difficulties they went through with the flooding. The towns are really pretty strapped, especially the towns that had extreme flooding. So this bill got to the Senate, went to the Senate, and of course the Senate changed a lot of things. Took out my pet project of incentives for electric bicycles, which I think is a really great thing. Has helped our bike shops in town. Anyway, that's coming back to us, and that will go to a conference committee, meaning that 3 members of the House and 3 members of the Senate will get together and hammer out the details. So it's sort of a horse trading. Well, if I do this, will you do that, etc. And then we also did, and this is the last one, and then I'll let John talk, a pollinator protection bill to ban the use of, neonicotinoid pesticides in farming, pest management. And that is a really good thing because, of course, we are concerned about our bees. And there was definitely a conflict there. The administration is saying, there's no problem with the bees, they're fine. And all the other, people who are working with bees are saying, there's a big problem. And we managed to get this passed. We'll see what happens. And that is the Senate Agricultural Committee passed it out of their committee, and it's being debated in Senate Appropriations. And I think that is all that I have to say right now. So I'm going to turn over to John, who is are you the state head of Third Act?
No, I won't claim that. I'm the volunteer coordinator for Third Act Vermont.
Anyway.
I actually moved back to Brattleboro in 2021 after being here a long time ago. I'm a Marlborough College and Vermont Law School graduate. And then more recently was a co-chair of 350 Montana. It got too smoky and too crazy, and I'm back here and happy to be back here. Third Act Vermont, for any of you that don't know, is a group that Bill McKibben formed, the same person that formed 350, for people in their third act. It's for people over 60, although we don't card anybody, and we're focused on both climate and democracy. One of the theories, Bill's theory, and I think a very good one behind the group, is that older people bring a lot of experience and life skills to the organization. They actually have access to a higher percentage of the financial assets, which can be used as leverage as well. One of the many things we've done so far is a cut up your credit card event at Chase Bank. The other thing is we're not worried about having an arrest record or anything like that, so the idea of engaging in civil disobedience is a little more comfortable for us. Third Act is a national organization. It has paid staff. It's divided up into both working groups and affinity groups. The working groups are by state. I think there's about 40 of them now. There are some states that don't have them, and there are a few that are coming online every month or two. Affinity groups are groups with specific interests. There's a union group, a faith group, a lawyers group, a creatives group, something like that. The goal, and again, this, like not carding, is not something anybody checks on, but the goal is to have the working group, like Third Act Vermont, put 60% of their effort into the national campaign and 40% of their effort into local campaign. Our group has been focused on some legislative things this year, and that's kind of been a mixed bag. We put a lot of effort into a divestment bill that just went down the tubes, and it went down the tubes because of pressure from the previous Republican treasurer, pressure from the independent commission that runs the divestment at this point, or the investment funds for the state, and that's something new. It used to be in the treasurer's office, and had it remained in the treasurer's office, I'm sure it would be divested by now. But there was an independent commission created a couple years ago. It was staffed with very conservative people, and they fought tooth and nail against divestment, claiming it was going to cost them so much money to figure out which funds they needed to get rid of, and they would have to hire 3 more employees, etc. The fact of the matter is that there's a lot of information out there at this point that funds do better if they do divest. And you heard Mollie talk about the one bill that is make big oil pay. There's a lot of negatives in their future. So I'm very sad to see that happen, but I'm sure we'll be back again next year.
We'll work on it next year.
Yep, absolutely. Third Act Vermont has about 600 members. Like always, there is a small central group that is active, and then a lot of people on the list that you might be able to get to call their legislator, send letters, things like that to keep things going, and get support for a bill. We've tried and are now setting up regional groups. There's a regional group in Windham County that has been doing postcarding, and the postcarding is basically get out the vote for various races. We postcarded, as did another group I belong to, whose members are here. We postcarded in favor of getting Tom Suozzi elected in New York a month or 2 back, and we were successful in that. Right now, looking largely at special elections. Not that I think it was just us.
Who's Tom Suozzi?
Tom Suozzi, who was the guy that got kicked out of Congress?
Santos.
Santos, yeah. He ran for Santos's seat. And that flipped a seat. The Campaigns we've worked on, I mentioned divestment, fossil-free finance, divestment is part of that, as was the cut up our credit cards at Chase. There's a forest carbon campaign, and what we're basically doing with that at this point is really supporting the work of standing trees. We're focusing on biomass, and I know Mollie mentioned the Affordable Heat Act. That's now in front of the Public Service Commission, Public Utility Commission, I guess it is in Vermont, and they have 2 years to come up with a plan, and we're a little concerned about what that plan might look like, so we're going to have to stay on top of that, and that's something we're working on. The other thing is we have recognized there really is a need to step it up, and a whole coalition of climate groups are starting to work on something this summer that's going to be called the Summer of Heat on Wall Street. It's going to focus primarily on Citicorp. It's going to be multiple events all through the summer. It's going to involve a fair bit of nonviolent civil disobedience. And while it's a third act national program, obviously people from Vermont are going to be able to get there and have an impact far more often than somebody from California. So we're looking at getting very involved in that. And that's pretty much what I have to say about third act at this stage of the game, but I'm happy, like Mollie is, on her area to answer any questions, talk about it, or let you.
Can I just say something before we go to that phrase? I think that this sort of illustrates the effectiveness that there's the legislature and the work of the legislature, and then there's the work of advocates. And both really need to work together. Without advocacy, we're sort of like, we need advocates to say, I have like 20 constituents who want this bill or whatever. It's very, very important. The push from the outside is really important. And then you need people on the inside to be able to carry the legislation forward. So I think that John and I sort of illustrate those two factors in making change. So I guess, so maybe we should have questions and then maybe a discussion. Does that sound like a good idea? Yeah.
Two questions, one for Mollie, one for John. Mollie, what of the bills that you spoke of, which are the high probability bills? Which are the ones that are most likely to get through, looking nearly what they started out as?
Well, I think versions of all the ones I spoke of, they're all the bills I spoke of, I think, have either passed as House or Senate. And so...
Don't they have to pass both?
They have to pass both, yeah.
So what I'm saying is, what are the high probability of getting through both?
Well, I think that probably most of them are pretty high priority bills. I think they'll get through in some form. But like the housing bill that I talked about, H.8 29, that has an uncertain future in the Senate. So I don't know how that's going to get reconciled. So I can't really predict. I mean, I know the transportation bill is going to pass, H.8 68. What it's going to contain exactly is up in the air right now. So I would say that, and then the question becomes, any bill that the governor vetoes, do we have enough votes to overcome the veto? And we have scheduled a veto session for June 17th and 18th. Last year, we had 5 vetoes. We dispatched them in about an hour. We just went through, and all the vetoes were, we had enough votes. I know that the leadership was trying to schedule the veto session, and there was no week in June, like we had to wait till after June 1st, when the bills would be delivered to the governor and everything, where there were 4 Democrats missing. So it's a challenge to make sure that on the day that you're going to have the veto, that you have enough people who are going to vote for a veto override, and also to make sure that those people can be there. Some people are, traveling or whatever. So I can't say exactly, but I would say there's a good chance that pretty much all of them will come through in some form, because they were really the bills that were very, high priority bills for
Thank you.
the legislature.
John, when you talk about why City Corp, why this summer, what's going on?
Okay, what we're looking at are, and Citicorp is one of the 5 dirtiest banks. And thank you for that question. That's an important thing to make clear. There are really 5 banks that are most involved in financing the fossil fuel industry. And ultimately, that's, quite frankly, our money financing the fossil fuel industry. If we have it in any of those banks, or we use credit cards with any of those banks, etc. And Citicorp is one of those 5 dirty banks. I don't know exactly why Third Act National focused on Citicorp versus Chase, because Chase is right there as well. And the other thing is, I think there is a lot that is being kept a little bit close to the vest at this stage of the game, because it is going to be civil disobedience. We ran into at Chase in Burlington. Part of our plan was to occupy the bank and have a group of people arrested and get the publicity that goes on with that, etc. And they locked the bank early. So we couldn't do that. But we kind of were prepared for that, because we had the discussion, okay, so what do we do if? And we had signs that we plastered all over the front of the bank, closed due to moral turpitude and things like that. But again, a lot of detail isn't out there yet. I was involved in something in Washington State years ago that was actually closed down. It has a record of closing down a rail line for the longest period of time. It was called Break Free Pacific Northwest. And my group did not know what our job was until they said, okay, go, here's where you go. And so that's one of the things that does play into that.
I have an idea. I don't have any of those credit cards, but it seems to me that it would be worthwhile to apply for those credit cards and have it, and then say, well, I'm getting rid of you because of that. Why not?
Can't hurt.
Right.
Yep, can't hurt.
Yeah, more people would, get rid of it if they had it.
Yep.
Who are the other 3?
Yeah, Richard, if you could facilitate, that'd be great. Yeah.
Sure.
The other 3 are, let's see if I can do it, Citicorp, Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and I'm not sure what
Aren't
the...
there just 4 of them?
There were 5, but
5, okay.
TD North?
It's not, no, it's not.
no.
CD, not TD?
No, TD, in Vermont, TD is one of the worst, but, yeah, but those are 4 of the 5 anyway.
Yeah.
Hi, I have a question for Mollie. I'm interested in Act 250 and how you might see the changes happening, because Act 250 was quite good in its day to decentralize development, to not concentrate development and ruin the nature and the forests we have. But what happened with that is it meant transportation spread things into rural areas. And now the whole thinking is 15-minute neighborhoods, new villages, new village centers. Is Act 250 looking at densification instead of spreading out into...
Definitely, that's the proposal from the House. Again, it's going to be different, is to create tiers. So there'd be like tier 1, which would be a denser development where you would not have to go through permitting. And then there's sort of tier 2, which is an in-between area. And then there's tier 3, which is like, pristine forest land and wetlands and things like that. So yes, definitely, that's one of the things. And that goes along with a bill we passed last year to allow anywhere where there's single family housing, that you could have a double house, a 2-unit doubling house. So that to encourage development in places where there's municipal water and sewer. So yes, that's one of the goals. And I expect that the Senate version would probably have some of that too.
Because the strength of Vermont is its villages.
Excellent.
And how can we create new villages rather than spread?
Right, and we talk about that a lot in transportation because it's very difficult, you know, the public transit system exists in Vermont, but it's very challenging, you know, that, we're so spread out, and how can you make villages more central to everything? And it's a problem because, you know, schools are closing in towns, that's one thing, one big issue. Schools being consolidated, and that's a whole other issue that's happening with the education fund. So, yes, I would say that that's definitely a priority.
Hi.
Oh, sorry, hi.
I have two questions, if I could. And I couldn't think of one for you, John, sorry, so they're both for Mollie.
Or your neighbors, right?
You know where to find me.
Yeah. What was the question? You spoke, Mollie, about advocacy groups, and well, John did as well, but the importance of motivating legislators to, you know, come up with bills and to vote on them and pass them with support. I know this isn't national politics, but are there any really influential and environmental and or anti-environmental advocacy groups that are part of the scene in Vermont?
Absolutely. The Vermont Council, the NRC, Vermont Natural Resource Council, they are in the building every day. Sierra Club, Conservation Law, a bunch of environmental organizations, and they are sort of they sort of have a consortium too. And we work, in the transportation world, I work very closely with Sierra Club and Vermont Natural Resource Council. We don't have staff. So our sort of quote-unquote lobbyists, we like to call them advocates, are helpful as staff. They can give us information, connect people, connect things, etc. So yes, they're very active. Very active. I'm trying to think those are the main ones.
And Third Act is on their way to being in that team.
Well, Third Act isn't really in the State House, right? We sort of
Right, yeah,
Oh,
we
okay.
did one day in the card room at one point, but generally we're not in the State House. Our role can be more, somebody reaches out and say, hey, this piece of legislation is coming up, and we can maybe generate some letters to legislators and phone calls, et cetera.
Actually, I just thought about another lobbying group, is the Youth Climate Lobby. We've been very influential. They always have an event outside the State House, and there was one year they all came into the State House, got into, went and talked to the speaker, et cetera. And that's been a very powerful lobby. I mean, they're not in there every day, but definitely a very exciting group. In fact, I have an intern working with me now from UVM who was in the Youth Climate Lobby as a high school student, and then she got involved in different things, and she's an amazing intern, and she'd read the whole climate action plan before coming to work with me, which is 250 pages or something. Anyway.
And then, since you brought up housing, I've had this thought, and maybe others have as well, that maybe everyone knows that in Vermont, if I have this correct, there's the homestead tax rate and the non-homestead tax rate if it's not your primary residence. And that applies just at the state level tax for the education funding.
Right.
But there isn't an analog at the municipal level. So I'm wondering if, to address the housing crisis, maybe, I realize non-homestead, non-resident people aren't, necessarily, they're probably not having children in the school system. So already the fact that it seems to me like they pay on average the same rate, more or less, as the homestead rate. So already one could say like, oh, they're already paying more than their fair share, but they could maybe pay more, and that extra amount could go towards a housing fund. And then maybe at the municipal level, there could be a division in the rate as well, and some sort of, benefits from non-homesteads could go to homesteads.
Well, that's sort of topical right now, but there's a yield bill that's coming to the floor tomorrow that is dealing with the sort of big crisis in the education fund. And I think that the rates on non-homestead rates might be raised a little bit. So talking about more funding when people in towns are, I mean, school taxes are going to be going up around, on average, about 15%, which is huge. And it's a combination of inflation, it's a combination of the end of the ARPA funding and pandemic funding, and it's a combination of mental health needs in schools have really increased dramatically, so schools have hired more staff, and now their schools budgets are up. It's a whole sort of big crisis, and this new bill is going to be setting up we didn't come to hear about school funding, but it's all related. To set up a sort of blue ribbon tax commission to look at future, how do we fund our schools adequately without burdening taxpayers? So anyway, yeah, right.
Yeah, I have questions for both of you, but I'll start with a general question for Mollie. It seems like Vermont has had a really great reputation for good environmental legislation. And I'm wondering, what are the political dynamics like in the House as you've been working? Do Republicans help with this, or is there a kind of a good cross-party dynamic, or is it mostly Democrats pushing?
We have a
I'm
huge.
curious how it all works.
We have a super majority,
Yeah.
so it helps.
Yeah.
And then with Democrats and progressives, it's about 109 or something. I think that, but for example, as I referenced the transportation bill that we passed, I have on our committee, there are 11 members on our committee, 8 Democrats and 3 Republicans. And it was a unanimous vote. And, we were voting for electric vehicle incentives, for charging network, for complete streets, for this mobility and transportation innovation program that gives grants to innovative public transit projects. So, it's like people aren't bored with that. And that bill passed the House unanimously on a voice vote. So, I mean, a lot of those ideas have become very mainstream. And I think people do recognize that, I mean, when I first went to the legislature, hardly anybody was even mentioning the word climate. It's really pretty amazing. And I think that people now recognize that it's a problem. The flooding has really brought that into focus. And I think that, but the issue is how fast you move. And one of the things is the governor is like, well, we can't spend any money. Can't spend any money on anything. I mean, like, and it's really unfortunate that, getting into politics here, is that the governor would not be so popular without the votes of Democrats. And a lot of Democrats vote for, and he's a very nice guy, and he's a decent person, and he supported some gun legislation and supports women's rights and things like that. But he really is sort of very much about not thinking like, well, if we spend the money now, it's going to solve problems down the road. He's more about, we just can't spend any money. And it's really unfortunate, because I think, and we sort of need a partner in this, because very often the administration won't even come in and weigh in, and then all of a sudden they'll just veto something at the end. So it's very frustrating, and we hope to have a different dynamic. But meanwhile, we hope to have enough votes to overcome all the vetoes that he's going to give us. Yes.
So,
Hi, sorry, you have another
related question?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Can I
Yeah.
follow up then with more specifically, are there bills that are up now that could be really helpful to have people write letters or contact? Are there ones that are especially kind of vulnerable or needing extra pushes that we could get involved as advocates?
I think at this stage, maybe that might sort of backfire because things are so far along. I think that's better in the beginning of a session. Well, I don't know. I'd have to think about that, certainly. I mean, I think it's probably better in the beginning of the session.
So wait till next.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
another spot, Molly, where that might come in is when, and I'm not so sure it's a big deal with Brattleboro legislators, Brattleboro area legislators, but when we get to veto time, when you need that majority to override a veto, there may be people that need to be pushed.
Except it's really important, I mean, somebody, if I get an email from somebody in another district, like, that's not gonna matter to me. I mean, it might, but I mean, it's not, whereas if you know somebody in another part of the state who has a representative who's maybe, then that's very effective. That one-on-one, call up your friend, could you please, push your legislator to do that? So that's something that's really good. But, I'll sometimes get emails from somebody from somewhere else in the state, and, I'll read them, but I don't necessarily, if they're pushing me to do something, I don't necessarily, I'm interested in what my constituents want, so, yeah.
Hi. Hi, I just have a question from your comment about, I guess, this contention again around spending and don't spend any money, because I'm a little, I just need clarification, because I've been reading that the budget that's being looked at for next year, it sounded like the Democrats and the Republicans were kind of on the same page, or the governor was sort of on the same page with the budget, but then there was an extra spending bill that was coming out, that there were additional spending bills outside of the budget that were to pay for housing and Medicaid expansion.
Yeah.
And so I guess I just want to understand that it sounds like there's agreement on the budget, but there's not agreement on the extra spending bills.
I think you're talking about the Senate Appropriations Committee.
Okay.
And what happened is in the House, like for instance, in that housing bill I was talking about, the House did a couple of bills that have specific funding mechanisms attached to them, not separate. Like for instance, this housing bill, there was a increase of taxes on incomes over $500,000. And there was a increase in the property transfer tax on properties over $750,000, just a marginal rate. In other words, it didn't kick in until the $750,000 limit, and then it was like, I forget, I can't remember what the rate was. But anyway, things like that. And so the House sort of attached, like, okay, we've got this policy here, and this is how we're going to fund it. Apparently, the Senate doesn't like to do that. So I think that's what you might have been reading about in Vermont.
I was trying to understand it
So-
because it sounded like, here's your budget, and then there were separate spending bills
Yeah.
that were not incorporated
Well, I
into
think
the
more like
budget.
policy bills, maybe that's what you mean by spending bills.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah.
separate.
I'm not
policy
sure what you're
bills
referring to, but I think you're referring to an article that was in Vermont Digger
Yeah.
that talked about that the Senate, like, they don't like to have the two together, which is sort of strange, because you think, well, if we're gonna do this policy, wouldn't it be nice to know how we're gonna fund it? They just wanna lump everything into one budget with a line item.
Mhm.
I think that's what you're referring to, but I don't know if I've
Okay, so it's all
answered
in one
your
budget.
question.
Okay, yeah, I was trying to understand
Yeah.
the article.
Well, I do know that specifically that, I think that the answer is that the House did, these separate bills with separate funding mechanisms embedded in them. And the Senate just wanted the money out of the policy into just a main bucket so they could see the whole picture, what the appropriations were.
So that it would, to see what the bottom line was in
Yeah.
the budget.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
instead of taking it out of the budget and having it not
Yeah, but
impact
that would
the
have to
bottom
go in the
line?
budget anyway, so
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just a matter of how they wanted to do the same thing. I mean, how they wanted to do something, but do it differently.
Okay. I don't know this one. Okay, thank you.
I don't know if I can answer that.
I have 17 questions, but maybe I take a break and let someone else. So one thing, the HEAT Act, I'm on the Energy Committee, and the issue that we've had for years is we've signed on to the Global Climate Solutions Act. Global Earth. But we have no idea what our base of greenhouse gas emissions is for any time at all. My understanding was that this bill maybe would make it easier for us to get information from, from the oil and gas vendors, so that we could possibly somehow get information about how much fossil fuel is being used residentially and in businesses. Is that something that that relates to? I've just been a little confused about that, because it's been very frustrating that we really can't get the information about what our greenhouse gas emissions are here. So how can we know whether we're...
We do have information about transportation greenhouse gases, and have you ever looked, it's a really good thing that comes out every year. If you go to the Energy Action Network website, they have every year they do an analysis of where our greenhouse gases are and where we're not, and how we're not meeting our greenhouse gas goals. So I'm not sure, I think that what you mean is that maybe because of the Affordable Heat Act, we haven't been able to quantify the heating oil that comes in this state.
Right,
I
exactly.
think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I'm talking specifically about Brattleboro, because
Yeah.
the select board has said that we're going to, abide by this.
Yeah.
And, we're supposed to give, the planning committee is supposed to give a report on how we're meeting the goals, but you can't know whether we're meeting the goals if we don't know what our past and present emissions are.
Yes, I think that's one of the things that Affordable Heat Act might do, but it still has to go back to the legislature for final approval. And one of the things that people are concerned about is how much is that going to impact people's fuel bills.
Right.
And so we won't know that until next year. And but I think that there's some analysis. Go see if you can find the pamphlet, or actually it's a report that an Energy Action Network puts out every year, and it has different sectors and what they're using for the amount of greenhouse gas uses. So I don't know how we drill that down to Brattleboro.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think that would be statewide. But anyway, it's a really, really great report with a lot of good graphics.
Okay.
And that's a really great organization too, by the way. Forgot to mention them. Yeah.
Another thing was the solar leasing being cut out of, I forget what bill that
Community
was.
solar being cut out of the renewable energy
Yeah.
standard?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know that was a problem for some people, and I think that there was some talk that maybe the Senate might fix that. I'm not sure where that's at right now.
Well, my understanding was it was sort of horse trading with the utilities.
Yeah.
And what were they trading for that? Again, with Brattleboro, it's like we're stuck with the net metering for the town. We're like, we can't put any more solar because we're stuck with what we have.
Right.
And trying to get, and I was on the solar siting committee, which we did great work, but it's like we're not getting, we're not implementing new solar very much at all. So what needs to be done to change that?
I think I'm not on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and I know that there was a lot of discussion during that time. And I think that definitely was a compromise, people hoping that it would get fixed in the Senate, but I don't know if that's happening.
Yeah, I know a little bit about it as well. The horse trading was, the utilities said they insisted on that in order to be willing to go to the 100% renewable standard.
Okay.
And that was basically what the trade-off was.
Okay, and then another thing, I just, read about this award for Solar for All that Vermont just got. Do you know about that?
Solar for all?
Yeah. Clean Energy just posted about how, we got, we're part of this award that Vermont's getting. I don't know, it's like a $7 billion thing, and I forget what Vermont's getting for that, for low income, for installing solar for low income people as a
Is
federal.
that breaking news? Did you I think I just read about that.
Yeah, I just saw it today. I
Yeah.
think. Well, you got to get up to date, Mollie. And then the final thing is, again, I'm on the Energy Committee, and there's all this stuff that we want to do. And it's like, I'm just thinking of Third Act. I'm actually a member of Third Act. I haven't really been very involved with it because I've been doing all this other stuff, and I want to be more involved. But there's a number of, things that we're doing, like we have the e-bike library. And we have an e-bike library at the library that I helped start, and I've been running for 3 years. And I've been doing most of the administrative work on it because we don't want the library to be spending resources on that. But I finally got volunteers to do it. I mean, here's this like great free thing that's not hasn't cost the town anything until last month when we had to get a new battery for one of the bikes. And that was Friends of the Library. It wasn't even the town, right? So there's this free service that's been given to the town, and it's been like finding volunteers to help staff this has been really hard. And this is like, most people in Brattleboro are like, oh yeah, we've got to do something about climate change. There's this window dressers. I don't know if you know about window dressers. So that's not easy, publicizing it and getting people to volunteer for that. There are all these very practical, concrete things that don't have a huge benefit, but they're there and they're real and they're doing something. And it's frustrating, knowing that the community really supports these ideas, but here's something that you could actually do. Finding ways to motivate people to do simple, incremental, concrete things to make a difference.
Yeah,
Is there a bill for that?
I agree with you, yeah.
Yeah, I'll comment on that. I mentioned earlier that Third Act has about 600 people on the list and a much smaller active group. And I told you I was a co-chair at 350 Montana. We had something like 2,000 people on the list, and there was a small active group. And that seems that is always the way it is. And I don't know that I necessarily want to criticize anybody for that. You are, for instance, one of those 600 people, and you're not doing anything for Third Act. But that's not because you're not doing anything.
Right.
It's because you're doing other things. And I think that is often the answer if you really got into it. You're either doing other things or there's something in your life that keeps you from doing it. And that is just life. That's how it works.
Well, I'm not satisfied with that.
I'm not either. That's why I'm the volunteer coordinator at Third Act Vermont, but I'm also resigned to my fate to a degree.
And I think, it's true that, people like you, keep things going in our town. You're serving on the Energy Committee, you're serving on this or that, or doing this and that. I wish that we had an attitude of World War II style mobilization, where everybody is realizing we are in a crisis and everybody needs to pitch in, whatever it is. You think about people during World War II, women didn't wear stockings, the whole way that everything was funneled towards the war effort, and how can we, and there's so much, and I think, Vermont is, most people, I think, would agree that climate change is a problem, but how to get people really motivated to realize that it's an existential threat and getting worse every day, so, I don't know.
Installing your own solar is a huge investment for a lot of people, unless you're very well off. This is a question for you too. I don't know your first name.
Can you hold it
You can
closer
talk a little louder,
again?
Richard.
Your first name?
Tony.
Tony? That it's a question, I guess, for both of you, is that has the state, you made a covered this already, but because you went through a lot of bills, I missed it. But it's a two-part question. If I wanted to buy into community solar, because I can't afford $20,000 to put my own community, is there an opportunity to do that in Brattleboro? And can you do it, and how? And then, if you can't, has the state in the legislature tried to make that easier, or to make it more ubiquitous, that anybody who wants to buy into a community solar can do it? So
Somebody
is it
knows more than I
possible?
do about it, but I think that in the past, we used to make it easier. And I think that, Efficiency Vermont has programs to, but, a lot of programs are for, I actually do not know very much about this, but I bet
And
Tony
it's
does.
being maybe cut out.
Huh?
And it's maybe being cut out.
Do you have some answers to what I was just asking?
Not really, no, I mean,
Okay.
yeah.
I think Tony's point earlier in talking about what's happening is that community solar is being cut out, at least in terms of any incentives. Whether somebody might do it without any incentives to make money, I don't know, but there's no, the net metering, et cetera, is going away, as I understand it, from the
Are
legislation.
you saying it's being cut out because the legislature did something or didn't do something?
They made a deal, basically.
Who's they?
The legislature and the utility companies to cut out community solar in return for the utilities agreeing to go to 100% renewable. And I know Third Act was involved in making the decision, are we going to support this bill or not? And there was a lot of back and forth on it. And we supported it, feeling that it was the better of two evils, essentially, to get that 100% renewable power supply. It was worth walking away from community solar.
Which doesn't mean it won't come back.
It doesn't mean it won't come back. It doesn't mean you can't do solar. And you don't necessarily have to do a whole $20,000 system at once either. You can get the charge controller, et cetera, and put up one panel and then add one more panel 2 years from now.
Just related to that too, a lot of the argument against it is that it's a subsidy for people using solar, so it costs people who aren't. It costs other customers more. They have to pay more for their energy. So the argument is that it's not fair to other customers, and often people who can't afford solar. So the argument is that the more wealthier people are able to get this subsidy to do these things, and your regular and lower income people are paying for it.
I ran into somebody who was working here in town, and he was working, Mary Powell, the former CEO of Vermont Power, is now working for some company in California. I don't even, he was a very quick conversation, but he said that you could get solar for free, and then you would be buying your electricity from them or something. I don't know, and that's how you paid back. I don't even remember the name of the company, but it sounded about like a little bit too good to be true, but Mary Powell is a very reputable person and was chair of GMP for quite a long time, and so I was sort of interested, but I never really followed up on it. So there might be options like that. But there are certain, incentives for things like heat pumps. Efficiency Vermont gives incentives for heat pumps.
Right.
And
insulation.
different other kinds of heat pump technology.
All right, one other quick question, and I'll hand it off. If the governor is you talked about advocacy and not listening or not paying much attention to people outside your district, which is completely understandable. But if the governor, some of the bills that you talked about, if the governor's going to veto them, I don't recall in my years in Vermont, 20-odd years in Vermont, I don't recall ever hearing about a campaign to, but it's probably my fault, but a campaign to pressure the governor or for citizens to write to the governor? In other words, is there advocacy work to be done to prevent Scott from vetoing legislation that's important, that you think is important in June?
I have to say that, when the governor signed the gun safety bills, he was adamant against gun legislation. And then there was an incident, if you remember it, I think it was at Fairhaven High School, there was a threat. And he said, I didn't think it could happen in Vermont, but I realized it could.
I
I'm
remember
going to
that.
sign this legislation. So it wasn't actually an example of advocacy, but it was an example of circumstances changing.
Yeah, that was an act of God, but what about advocacy in the couple months ahead? Is
I'm
there
not
anything to
sure.
be done?
I don't think that the governor, maybe if there were a bunch of people who voted for the governor, if they might, pressure him, like, we voted for you and we want you to do this, that might work. I don't know.
But you're unaware of any group that tries
Sure,
to
people
mobilize to
People
over.
write to the governor all the time, but I'm not sure that and there may be concerted efforts, I don't know, because I'm not
John,
getting the emails.
anything to pressure Scott statewide?
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything, and of course, the other piece of that picture is you don't actually know what he's going to veto very far ahead. So
Yeah.
it's you can surmise.
I put the solar on his house.
Oh.
I designed.
So you probably know.
I know a bit, and the whole point of the subsidy to the solar was it was very expensive. And in the time that I was contemplating solar and actually doing it, it dropped $10,000 in the cost of the panels and the system. It was expensive and it gradually has come down. And now that it's more affordable, the subsidies have been taken away. But if we have a power company that is a B Corp, Green Mountain Power is working for our interests, they may be in a better position to do it more efficiently, to put solar as an energy source for the state, rather than individual people doing it inefficiently across, bits and pieces here and there. It may be more efficient to do one big field of solar panels than to do lots of little installations. So you could make the argument that maybe if the utility is acting in our interest, they may be able to deliver solar in a cheaper way for us. So that's something you can see. Maybe we don't need as much of this. In some states where you have a for-profit energy company, of course you want the solar yourself because you're fighting against a profitable company. So maybe that's another way to look at it. I just want to say.
Interesting. I think that's sort of like our, we have incentives for electric vehicles to help people buy electric vehicles, and that's something that I've worked on. And we are unfortunately running out of money, but hopefully we'll get another grant. But I think that that's sort of the same thing. You incentivize enough people to buy them and brings the price down, et cetera, and then eventually you don't need the incentives anymore. So.
Yeah, another piece of that whole picture, and I'm going back to how things operated in Montana, we had a large for-profit utility, and then we had a series of co-ops. Interestingly, the co-ops were basically in the areas that the large for-profit utility didn't want to serve because things were too far apart, and the co-ops provided electricity at less expense anyway. But the argument was always, and I went to solar. I had enough solar to basically make all the electricity I used, including a heat pump. And the argument was, okay, I end up paying nothing. I net out with net metering, and I pay nothing for my electricity. But I'm still using the lines because I'm sending excess power down the lines in the summer when I'm not using a lot, and I'm drawing power through the lines in the winter, and I'm not paying anything for maintenance of the lines. So that's another piece of that whole picture.
I hear your introduction, and I wasn't planning on staying, but I heard you talking about something that I'm interested in, and it might be off topic for this discussion, but I'm curious about what kinds of talk or ideas there may be now in Montpelier regarding a couple of things. Housing for like low income housing for homeless people, just to get them safe. And I have a few ideas about that, and I've seen there are a couple of states on the West Coast that have done some really great projects for that have been, I think, comparably, anyway, you know what I'm trying to say, low cost as compared to, say, the scaling up of the hotel that we did during the pandemic, which cost a lot of money. I don't remember the price, but it sounded like a lot to me for what we got out of it. So I'm just wondering if there are any sort of innovative ideas in that realm, and also in the realm of elder care. My understanding is that there is a silver tsunami imminent, and we have inadequate care infrastructure, and those options that we have are less desirable, I think, to many people, in particular to boomers, that don't really want to live at a traditional nursing home that's, where there are hundreds of them owned by one guy in North Carolina or something. So I guess I'm wondering, I think this relates to resilience, maybe from the more social avenue.
I think I understand what you're asking about. There is a group called Wyndham Aging, I don't know if you've heard of that they are working on, from the point of view locally, looking at the tsunami of, the demographics, and looking like years out, and how can we prepare for this. And there's actually a statewide thing called Vermont, what is it called? There's a division in the state government that's looking at that as well. So that's being, recognized as a potential problem. The housing issue, you probably were not here when I mentioned a bill, H829, I think, that the House passed, that had about $90 million in it for different buckets of housing: emergency housing, low-income housing, money to fix up existing units, money to for middle, what do you call it, the missing middle, new home buyers, et cetera. A bunch of different buckets, and that was to be paid for with taxing on incomes over $500,000 and increase the property tax on properties over $750,000. That bill is just sort of sitting in the Senate Committee on Economic Development, because they're developing another plan that has to do with regulatory reform. So we don't know. I think I mentioned at the beginning that there are a lot of bills that are in process right now. They've moved from the House to the Senate, or the Senate to the House, but they haven't been reconciled yet. So that's still up in the air. But everybody recognizes that housing is a big issue, is a problem, and we need to do something about it. I think you talk about innovative housing. I think that the issue with these is that somebody, developer could get money to do something innovative. You know what I mean? That there's not like plans for this money is to be used for this particular type of housing. It's more for a category of people. And I know one of those categories are families who have developing disabled children who are adults now. And families are concerned about what's going to happen to their children, as they pass, and can they live an independent life. And that's one of the buckets in the housing plan that the House had. So it's all sort of in process right now.
Thank you. I think
We could have, we have constituent meetings every month, and I'm sure we'll have one at the end of the session. They're on the first Saturday of every month. So probably we would have our last one maybe the first Saturday in June. Although, I'm not sure. Anyway, but we'll have some sort of a wrap-up of the session in general. And a lot of these questions will be somewhat answerable, except that there are probably some vetoes pending that we don't know. Anyway, you know, we have a person over here. Oh, I forget her name. Jennifer. Jennifer, yeah. Come and tell people what you do, because she's an AmeriCorps volunteer here in town, doing something very interesting.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Meinard. I'm the current Eco AmeriCorps volunteer serving at the Rich Earth Institute. And yeah, I'm just happy
They'll be
to
here
hear
next week, somebody from Woodchurch will be here.
Yes,
at the
Jamina
forum.
Shupak, our co-director, will be here as part of the larger Earth Day panel with a few other organizations from Brattleboro. Yeah. Do all of you maybe know what Rich Earth is, or is that an unknown entity? I can give a brief.
I've provided material for them.
Oh, excellent. You're a donor. Good. We love our donors. Yes, well, in brief, for those potentially watching, the Rich Earth Institute is an environmental nonprofit here in Brattleboro which collects human urine donations to turn into crop fertilizer in order to mitigate the effects of downstream nutrient pollution from our urine, and instead use it as a resource since it is very high in nitrogen, which plants need to grow. And most farmers buy their nitrogen from synthetic organizations that produce synthetic nitrogen that's also incredibly energy and material intensive. So we're trying to rethink the cycle. Yeah.
And that energy has to be shipped in.
As well,
another
yes.
place that it helps the environment. Jennifer mentioned me because I'm on the board of Rich Earth, so I'm familiar with what they do as well.
Great that you're here.
There was one part of that question that I forgot to mention, which was, I'm just kind of curious what the feeling is in Montpelier about tiny houses. Is there any reason that we aren't building them that you know of?
I couldn't answer that. I mean, I'm not on the housing committee. I don't know if that's been discussed. I mean, we had, how many years ago, like 5 years ago or so, Aaron O'Keefe did a whole sort of, I don't know if you were around then, we had a whole, like a whole weekend of tiny houses parked in parking lots in Brattleboro. You could go in and see them, and it was pretty exciting. But, you know, I think that's going to have to be part of the solution.
I think it could help with elder housing as well as homelessness and youth housing.
You talked about advocacy before, and you said you listened to the Sierra Club and to, is it Conservation Law, or you mentioned 2 advocacy groups. But I know
Natural Resource Council, DNRC.
350 Vermont is another one, and they were going to be involved with this, but their interface with Brattleboro has been minimal over the last year, so it just didn't work out. But I'd like to hear more about the Sierra Club in terms of, do you listen to them? What makes you listen to an advocacy group? Is it because they have a large grassroots, it's not money, they're not buying they're not spending money they're not taking you out to lunch. But what makes you listen to one advocacy group over another, and do you have any sense that the Sierra Club represents a lot of people, that they have a constituency or a base?
Well, I would listen to them because they're aligned with what I'm trying to do. They have information. They have, you know, like if I'm working on like cutting carbon emissions from transportation, that's something that they support, and they have information, or they have, you know, they have ways to advocate for that.
So it's not so much that they influence your vote on legislation, is that they provide information. They're not an advocacy group in the way that I think.
Well, they might be coming and saying, hey, have you thought about this? Or maybe you could, you know, consider this. We're promoting this policy. Is this something? You know, it's a give and take. it's a give and take, but it's not a, oh, hey, step over here and listen to me.
That's how politics works in Washington. I mean, we send
Vermont
money
is
to these
different.
organizations.
Wait, our advocates are really, I mean, you know, we sort of say they're white hat and black hat lobbyists. That was sort of more in the VY era, you know, where people would, corporate people would come up from, where are they from? I forget. Anyway, somewhere in the South and come up and, you know, try to talk to legislators. But, you know, and there are certain groups in the State House, like law firms that are advocates. And, you know, some of them are known as, like, if you really want something to happen and you have the money, you want to hire this particular group because they're very good at what they do and they're very, very ethical, you know. So it's you know, and there are people, there are lobbyists in the legislature who are lobbyists for public transit, lobbyists for, you know, medical, you know, things for, it's a whole range of
All
that.
right, but the Sierra Club then is not a force in terms of environmental legislation as far as you're concerned, but just more of a resource.
Well, I would say they're a force too. You know, we work closely together.
Are there any other forces besides Sierra Club?
Yeah, the Vermont Natural Resources Council.
And who do they represent?
There's a group called Transportation for Vermonters. There's, you know, they're, you know, we're working on the same things, I would say. And so they can provide information, or they can provide support, or they might say, you know, I'm trying to talk to this other legislator to, you know, help them understand this issue better.
I guess what I'm getting at, Molly, a little bit, not totally, but is that if you want the legislature to pass, you say people should get involved, there should be a groundswell in it, and people should really care about this. Well, the way that most people, we can't go to Montpelier, so you do that through an organization, an advocacy organization, and I'm trying to get at which ones are players.
Contact Third Act.
But John just said he's not involved with the State House. You said that. So if it's not Third Act, and it's not Sierra Club, is it anybody that in a statewide organization or grassroots?
Yeah, I don't think it's fair to say we're not involved, and if I gave that impression, we're not there every day. But our divestment group was very involved. They gave testimony, they brought in witnesses, and if it's something we really tackle as a project, we may be. But that's what you need to do is get a group convinced to really work on it and push it. And sometimes the way to do that is say, okay, so I'm going to step up and head this committee for your group. We would certainly be willing to do more if we had more help.
Is there any chance that Vermont could sort of stick its neck out and sort of go for taxing SUVs, or trying to look at the growth of the American car is such a consumes so much oil? Is there a way to encourage people to small cars? In Europe and other places, they tax parking of the cars much more, and there's graduate tax. Is that anything possible?
You know, that's sort of heresy in the. But I would say that actually, I just heard from a group. They were sponsored by actually the Sierra Club sponsored this talk by a group called Cultura, and they're based in Boston, and they are doing they're promoting oh my gosh, what do we call it? Like a super user fee. You know, they're targeting super users, not like to shame people, but to show you know what, you might be a low-income person driving a car that really gets terrible gas mileage, and we want to find out who you are, and we want to help incentivize you to buy a more fuel-efficient car. So that's something that we might wind up being able to do. We tried it one time and it got shot down. But we do have a lot of incentives. I mean, people are able to buy electric cars now for affordable price with the state incentives that we have. We have a program for new for low and moderate income people being able to buy a fuel-efficient car. On top of that, you get like a $2,200 rebate incentive from Green Mountain Power, and then you get also, we have a program called Replace Your Ride. If you have a car that's 10 years old, and you agree to scrap that car, you get $5,000, and then you get a $7,500 federal tax credit. So, we are trying to incentivize more fuel-efficient cars, and as a way to cut emissions. And the line for the incentives has gone like that, and now it's going like that. So we have now 13,000 electric vehicles registered in the state, and we're trying to get to, we have goals, and I always forget what they are. I think it's 27,000, 27, I can't remember. I can't remember what it is, but it's, it's part of our climate action plan. But I think, I don't know about taxing SUVs, but we have tried to, the other thing was that we had some legislation around fee dates, which is sort of similar to that. And that didn't really go anywhere. We tried to do that a few years ago. And that was that you would pay more on your registration if you had a car that was, and that could be something that happens in the future. But it wasn't, you've got to get pretty broad agreement on something, like to get something out of the committee. So that was something that didn't quite make it. But, the problem is that now they want to put a fee. A lot of people are complaining about electric vehicles, but they don't pay their fair share because they're paying the gas tax. And they did a study that said it didn't make sense until they represented 15% of the total vehicles in Vermont. Well, we are approaching that, and they're coming up with a plan, which would be like a vehicle miles travel plan for electric vehicles. But we'll see how that works out. But anyway.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for giving us all this information and answering all these far-ranging questions, and I learned a lot tonight, so I'm really grateful that you guys came out tonight, and thank you, Richard, for suggesting this and pulling people together, and thank you, all of you guys, for showing up and being committed